Evening, and welcome to the third installment of the Global Sport Lab's Spring Speaker Series, The World Cup Comes to Seattle. We're really glad to have you here. Apologies for the slightly late beginning. We had some technical difficulties, but we are here and ready to go. My name is Ron Krabill, and I'm the director of the Global Sport Lab in the Jackson School of International Studies here at UW. Each Monday evening through June 1, we will be bringing experts to speak about different aspects of Seattle's hosting of 6 World Cup matches this coming June and July. Before I introduce our guest for the evening, let me just remind everyone that we're operating as a hybrid program with about 80 students in the room and now that more than 300 participants registered online. And just a heads up that there will be opportunities for Q&A both in the room and online using the platform Slido. We'll put up a screen with Slido instructions for those of you online when the time comes. Thanks also to our co-sponsors, including my own academic home, the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences at the University of Washington Bothell, where I'm a professor, as well as the Responsible Business Law Initiative of the Bear Institute at UW School of Law, and of course, the Jackson School of International Studies. Now, I am really pleased to introduce tonight's guest, who not only agreed to speak with us about lessons from Qatar's hosting of the World Cup in 2022, but is doing so at 3 a.m. in Doha. So we really appreciate his generosity in agreeing to speak with us in the middle of his night. César Wazen is director of the International Affairs Office at Qatar University. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics, a teaching diploma, and a Master's in Educational Administration and Policy Studies, all from American University of Beirut. And he is currently pursuing doctoral studies in European and International Studies. With over 16 years of experience in education and administration, his commitment to fostering sustainable development in higher education leverages fluency in English, French, and Arabic, building impactful global partnerships, and ensuring inclusive academic opportunities for students and educators alike. And he comes to us tonight in part because he helped coordinate significant research partnerships between Qatar University and Qatar's Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy surrounding Qatar's hosting of the 2022 FIFA Men's World Cup. César, thank you so much for joining us in the wee hours of the day in Doha and for sharing your insights on what lessons Seattle can take from Qatar 2022. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ron, for the invitation. I really happy to engage with the audience on our experience because as you might be experiencing right now, it was not easy to think that down the line 4 years from Qatar, it will be lesson thoughts will still be shared and alive in that perspective. So I'll first some insights on our country and on our university. I will share my screen now and will ask you to let me know if everybody can see what I'm sharing. So can you all see my screen? Is it clear? Excellent. So yeah, as I'm saying, this is the experience from a very specific angle, Qatar University's angle. To start with, just to locate where Qatar is, it's a small country in the Middle East. I'm sure you've all heard about us lately. Sadly enough, might be for all the wrong reasons, but usually Qatar is a very famous country for conflict resolution, for big mega events hosting, and for having a very forward-looking and ambitious Qatar 2030 national vision. That centers, knowledge and at the core of its values, knowing that, despite the wealth of the country, it wants to benefit from the wealth of the LNG to construct a knowledge-based society. So this is about Qatar. It's a small country in the region, and but with big impact, thankfully enough. One of these big impacts is, of course, the hosting of the World Cup that we'll talk about. More specific is our perspective as a university. Qatar University, just for context, is the largest, oldest, and most prominent university in the country. It was for a while the only national institution And we'll celebrate our 50th anniversary next year. So relatively speaking, it's a young institution if you compare it to universities in the United States. But for the country, it is the oldest institution that is there. This is a very nice view of the campus. I love it because what you see close to you is the old, architecture, and there you can see the skyline, which is New York style or American style, big cities skyline, newly constructed. And also, of course, I kept the cranes very specific to our country. It's always being, there is always something new being built there. So this is an overview of the context. It's a comprehensive university, mainly, of course, teaching, but with a big portfolio on research, thanks to the big fund that exists in Qatar. And that brings us, of course, to, this is the the constitution of the university. Just to give you some perspective, again, for you to know what a big university is for us in the region and in Qatar, maybe compared to mid-size or small-size university in the US, just for you to see. So that's about Qatar University. And, throughout this presentation, I'll be running just two questions as polls to just get to know a little bit of the things that you are interested in. And these are run on Slido. I'll ask you to please scan the code that you see in front of you. And you might directly see the first question. So please do so. I'll give you like a minute or two to scan, go over the technical difficulties that we all love, and hopefully start, engaging with the poll. I can see that I have already 25, 29 people. It's being populated. So please, if you can, just go there and answer the first question. The question is about, what you'll be experiencing, hopefully positively in the next couple of months. And that is, looking ahead to the FIFA World Cup 2026, what impact do you expect it will have on the United States? It can be a very personal perspective, of course, or it can be like a macro perspective you can think of. So if you can just participate. So yes, as we can see, the polling is, I'll give you like, it's still being populated, but I'm happy to see that the negative views are just a minority. So in case you are not able to see it you will not be able to see it on my screen. I will just give you can see it, of course, on yours when you vote, but 54% gave a positive, or 55% now have a positive, feeling about it. 39% say it's too early to tell, which is definitely something that I have experienced when I was in Qatar until the first day. We were very, very worried at some point. And the negative impact is 7%. I'm asking you this question because in fact, this is a series of surveys that the CESRI, which is our survey institute at the university, ran for a while on the Qatari, society and perceptions of the World Cup hosting. And it was the first mega event. Of course, Qatar was under the spotlight. So this institute had started by checking, how do Qataris and non-Qataris perceive this event in terms of, impact on their society, on their lives, on their, on a day-to-day kind of work. So later on, we will go back to these results and discuss with you, specifically what are the positive things you might think will happen, and what might be some of the concerns you might have. So as of now, as I said, positive impact is 55%, negative is only 7%, and the rest, 38%, say it's too early to tell. So, why do we bring this? Why is this important now? Of course, conversation matters now because Seattle, many other cities, I think, in the US is preparing for the World Cup. Most legacy conversations usually happen after the event, but we both agree that this might be at some point too late. And so the central question here is not, what we build, but which institutions are mobilized early enough to matter. So usually universities, sadly enough, are a bit, either left out or come in late. So we're talking about, the hosting, the preparing at scale, and then beyond infrastructure and logistics. The mega events usually are framed around FIFA, of course, you know that, the International Federation of Football, that's how we call it, and that's how it is called. We'll argue about that later. And of course, the other international bodies, governments, definitely in this case, the US federal government, but also the local organizing committees and the local government. And of course, the private sector and the sponsors. However, the universities are rarely centered. If they are involved, it's either, because just like we were, also involved a little bit too late, or just on some things, not on everything that is there. So, the core thesis here is, these mega events become transformative only when, I would add, only when universities are embedded in their design and not sitting on the sidelines. And this is our experience. Basically, it started as being just a consulting role, and then evolved with time into being a very central role, as you will see from my presentation. So what do we mean by embedded? As I was explaining, we're not just like invited to the discussion. We're mostly the experience is across three roles. So we had three institutional roles after being, as I said, in the early stages of the preparation. That's like starting in 2014 for a 2022 World Cup. So 8 years before that, we were consulting on very specific and small scale projects. Now, what happened afterwards is that, we have become a part of an essential part of the conversation into three roles: knowledge and narrative. That's the first one. And then the innovation and problem solving. So basically for knowledge and narrative, it's how the event is understood, what's the impact. And then the second one is for constraints. How are we addressing these constraints? How should we address them? And the third one is the civic and the human capital. So how is society in general, and then people prepared, more specifically students and faculty members in our case. So I'll walk through each of them briefly, but give you some concrete examples so that you can relate to what you are living, and then of course talk to you more about the experience itself in the Q&A. First of all, we have handled handled these with catchy phrases like this one that you see. Of course, we handled it as a live research object. So basically, we went along with it as something that not as something that we study years later, but as a live research object that is moving along and that we are also accompanying along the way. So this allowed the research to engage with narratives while they were being produced, not after they settled. So we were along the way able to, as I said, accompany the thing. Of course, the timing was an issue because we were always running after time. So basically, I assume Seattle already has the infrastructure. I'm not assuming. I know that you already have most of the infrastructure. We had to start from scratch. We had an infrastructure that was very good for a country of 2 million people living in a city. It was definitely not infrastructure that was supposed to host at some point 400,000 people on the same day on top of what we already have. So this is where of course, the university was engaged in many of the things that we were doing. Of course, this is like some of the research that was done by our Gulf Studies Center. You can see those to really learn. Those of you who are really interested to learn about these topics, these were issued either before or along the way. There are also, so the Gulf Studies Center is our center for Gulf studies. Obviously, it's area studies. It involves everything that relates to the Gulf region. Very busy these days, of course, as you can imagine. And then, of course, there is the research office that hosted some events. And of course, our students also had their own research forum, that is a spin-off of what we have. So faculty and students were engaging together. It's not siloed expertise. This is what this event brought. And this, for those of you who work in academia, especially in higher ed, would know that, having a university work in anything else but silos is a very, specific and very interesting experience that you don't have, many times. So these are some of the pictures that you could see just for you, and you can research these online if you are interested in knowing more about what happened, how were students involved, and so on and so forth. So then we moved, of course, the conversation from talking to output. Again, in academia, this is a very important transition that we are always criticized about not having. So the debate alone was not going to make us have any legacy. It's the outputs that were going to do that. So now, of course, we had the usual peer-reviewed research, special journal issues, research magazines. All of these were produced during and after the tournament. Of course, some of them before. So we wanted to be, the legacy, as we would say it, should be an institutionalized knowledge, not just a specific kind of things. So these are some of the also readings that you might have. They were all produced, as I said, either before or after the World Cup in every field in business. So the first one is like in the business field and economics, and the second one is in the social sciences and humanities. So the culture as a soft power tool, what did it mean on a societal level? Then, of course, the research magazines. Now you can see this beautiful stadium. I will let you research online what it's called, but you could imagine. And then of course, the annual research forum and exhibition. All of these were highlighted in our research magazines. Now, basically, of course, along the way, there has been some constraints, some solutions to finding. So we had to move from hosting to engineering the solutions, if I may say. So let's move from ideas to infrastructure, basically. Climate, density, safety, you name it, global visibility, of course. All of these created very real operational problems. Something I didn't tell you, but I'm sure you know, is that in this region we have very, extreme weather. For 6 months a year, the temperature would run at 50 to 60 degrees Celsius, feeling like 50 degrees Celsius. So basically, these are very bad conditions. For those of you also who don't know, not football fans, usually the World Cup is run in the summertime, June, July, just like it's now back to its normal scheduling in the US. In our case, it was run in November. We will come back to this later, but initially it was announced and the work was being done on the World Cup being organized in the summertime, just like every other World Cup. And we would like to believe that partly our own research and our own work that at least in a small percentage diverted FIFA from, because it's a FIFA decision usually, it was convincing enough for FIFA to divert from hosting it in June, July in those extreme conditions. So this is what we will be talking about partly, of course, and then we'll focus more on what is of interest to you. So our role was to move beyond just being sidelined, giving some commentary about something that we're asked about and consulting into real problem solving. Can these players really play in such extreme conditions? That's one part, of course. So this is where we moved to the applied, if you want, research. And the pressure was, as I said, building up for a World Cup that should be hosted in extreme conditions and managing a crowd that is at a surge in crowd management that Qatar never experienced before. Of course, they had hosted before Asia Cup, the Asia Games and stuff like that, but it was never at the scale of a World Cup. This is the biggest event that happens on a worldwide scale. It's the equivalent of your Super Bowl extended over a period of a month. So you can imagine what that was. So initially, as I said, the university was engaged, the engineering team was engaged into trying to cool these stadiums and make them accessible in extreme times for both the spectators and the players. And of course, we succeeded in that. Our team has designed something, a technology that can work. It is being used as a new in 5 stadiums in the US now. It was exported. That's another important legacy. It's that you create knowledge and technology that can be exported. One of those is Miami, as I understand. One of these stadiums is Miami. However, the most important part is the human factor. It's that our researchers were able to advise, and I said, we don't want to claim that it is our reasoning that made that, but we can basically say that we contributed into the decision of changing back to November, which is a very nice weather here, because they were saying, people can sit there in these stadiums very well. They will be fine. Air conditioning would work excellent. The circulation of the air would be great. However, we cannot control, because it's a rule also of football that these are done in open air matches. So we cannot control, the impact on the players. And this is where it matters. The safety of the players cannot be guaranteed in those situations. So this is I took a little bit of time to focus on that, because I was quite involved in the build up for this. And of course, you can see the crowd management. As I said, it was very important for both security and for ease of ingress, egress. All of these things were very interesting to work on. And we designed our own app. It was already there, but we designed it, we custom made it specifically for, it's your normal GPS app, but it has very specific, insight on things that are related to events. Again, it's still being used. Every big event in Qatar now uses this app. It's very similar to your Waze app, but or Google Maps, but it has more specific information about the parking, the best parking spot. So basically live information. You'd be heading to the stadium. We will be going to attend these events, and then you can get notifications on what is the best parking spot for you, where to park, what are the empty parking spots, and where is the live traffic issue. The good thing is that it had its own monitors and sensors placed in Qatar. It doesn't use Google Maps or Waze sensors. So that's why it was a bit more accurate to have this in place. So of course, like some catchy, as we like to do them, catchy phrases. Integration beats specialization under mega event pressure. Definitely integrating this whole work. It was a lot of pressure building up, as I said, because we started from scratch. Even the university professors had not had this experience previously in their previous jobs or in Qatar. So basically, now of course, the whole thing comes down to where were we able to scale this for our stakeholders, especially students, faculty members. Excellent. We had researchers, we had a lot of research going on, but where did we really believe that we succeeded? Is the fact that it became a civic classroom. This World Cup thing became a civic classroom, in the sense that the third layer, which is the students, is usually overlooked, either considered as irrelevant, mostly as used as ushers. However, in our case, it was students were not only spectators; they were spectators. They enjoyed watching the matches. I myself watched 14 matches, so it can tell you about how nice it is to have it in a compact city. We can talk about that later on if you have any questions about this. But students were not only watching; they were participants in something bigger, in a national effort, and that is Qataris and non-Qataris. We were all united under this, big responsibility of making Qatar shine through this very important event. With the spotlight of the whole world on the country, it was very important for us to really shine and we all had our part to play. So we had like FIFA volunteer program, seminars, service learning integration, collaboration with the Supreme Committee. The Supreme Committee was the entity that was, it's the local organizing committee, if you want to think of it this way. It was, coordinating all the efforts being done. So we had all of these engagement sessions done. Students would, this is might sound like something familiar for you, but for us, it was the first time for some students to be, working with their faculty in such an equal to equal setting, where they were all learning something new. They were all having the same kind of responsibility. In fact, some of the students transferred the knowledge to the faculty members on some of the, social cues that they might not have, been aware of, especially for the newcomers. Of course, the specificity of the society, the Qatari society, the non-Qatari society. These are things that were transferred well enough by the students, because lots of them are, even if they're non-Qataris, they've been here for a while or been born here. So quite good on these social matters, and having some this kind of street smart kind of input for the faculty members. So of course, it comes down now with all this build up to how engaged the students were on the importance of the event itself. Now, this was first the build up. This was also at some point a part of the event, but now reality, this is where the event took place. Of course, we hosted, like, I think, Seattle will get, if it didn't get, they will get this trophy. We hosted the trophy itself. It was at the university. Of course, for kids, having the World Cup, taking their pictures with the actual trophy was something big. Even for some of our community members, it was something big. More importantly, for me at least, it's just so basically the university was not only a place for research. We have facilities that are good enough or excellent enough, should I say, that two of the best teams, in fact, the winner of the tournament even, decided to be hosted on campus. So we had to, of course, students were happy because they were given a month off, and the teams were hosted in our student facilities. It tells you how good these are in case you are interested to visit and have some courses there. That's Lionel Messi's room. It's still there, being used by students. We had the Argentina team and the Spain team fully hosted there. You can see how the whole setup was changed to have the logos and the branding of these teams. They were there for a month. These pictures are from the actual training fields that were designed at Qatar University by the Supreme Council, Supreme Committee. Basically, for these are training fields. Can you imagine? I've never played football on such a field myself. Imagine this is like a training field. They were hosted there for a month, of course, day in, day out, using the campus. So legacy again went beyond just a legacy that is related to the engagement of our students and our faculty. Even our campus now and still now is being looked at as a good enough campus to be serving as a host for the top teams. Basically, of course, they didn't want to be in a hotel because it gives them more discipline. And well, it worked well for Argentina, not so much for Spain. For the football fans, you might hate me for that, but this is how it went. So basically, the volunteering also wasn't like an ad hoc thing that you would do. Just it was introduced through seminars, and so basically, students had more access to these teams because they were more savvy in terms of security, in terms of how the secrecy, because these have tactics. So basically, we were not able to meet the team. Some of the students were able to meet the team and get a lot of the things that they left behind. So basically, I think this is, I would summarize this as whenever universities and other institutions, of course, but I'm talking, on university level, if the universities are not involved, I think we're talking short term. It will just keep like having a weak institutional memory, and the legacy is just something that might happen, might not happen. It's left to chance. And this is where most cities struggle. We're trying to change that by transferring, our experience with it. Hopefully, it will be something that what we can, keep with you. Of course, the events will end, but the universities remain. In the case of institutions remain, as the slide says, but in the case of universities, like they persist. I believe that a good thing and a bad thing is that we remain in time, 100, 200 years, sometimes unchanged. I leave it up to you to decide if it's good or bad, but they are here. So what actually benefits in the long run is what we have asked at Qatar University and of course at other institutions in the country. And then of course who benefits the most is one of the key questions. So I will ask you now to please go to the poll again and let me let me know what do you think, like who benefits most from these mega events according to you. It will also be helpful for us to start a discussion, of course, on who do you think is really benefiting from all this. So please go to the scan the poll and let me check. I might need to run it. I'm just going to put it there because I think it's not there. Um, yeah, now I think it's there now. So please, if you can go back and try to run it. I think it should be there now. You want me, let me just, yeah, I can see people starting to vote. So we have 10, 11. So please go that. So historically, who do you think benefits most from the mega events? I will share also the screen so that you can see it populated at the same time. So here it is. Yeah, well, I see that we have a big bunch of connoisseurs in football, it seems. Yeah, FIFA is taking the lead. Yeah, by the way, this is not just vote multiple choice, it's a ranking. So you can rank, in fact, which one you believe is more relevant, benefits more than the others. So it would be also helpful to see what you think is something that's relevant. So we're at 65 votes. I'll just keep it running a little bit. We're done with the presentation anyways. There's one more catchy phrase and then move on to Q&A after my last slide. So as you can see, the votes, FIFA takes the lead, sponsors next, host governments, let's see. Oh, Seattleites, if I say that this way, so local communities come in fourth place, universities in five. Wow. And no one benefits sustainably is six. That's quite sad, but we'll be ready to discuss that also with you. So let me go back to my slide deck. I think we have enough answers to fuel the discussion and finish up by just telling you one more thing, which is that the way we did it, at least, and this is not prescriptive, this is just our own experience. We treated this mega event as system-wide project. We had to, because as I told you, we all started from basically no knowledge in these mega events. We had, of course, our researchers had knowledge in their own field, But, facing questions of such importance as, really wanting to tell FIFA that it's not possible to have these players be treated this way was something like that we believe was a responsibility. Also, the big investment that the government was putting it was important to leverage and to really have some ROI, return on investment, given to this government that was really doing everything to have the hosting of the event to be that good. And I will tell you, every event has, you've been there before. The US has organized it in '94, and I remember back then there was also a lot of controversy from the footballing community. Back then, the US did not even have a real professional league, and like one of the things that were discussed was why would the US be given the hosting of such a big event while not even having their own league. So this is one of the things you might want to think of. We had also to face these kind of things because it's a small country. Why would you do it? It turned out to be a blessing. In fact, especially for football fans. Embed universities early and then design for post-event knowledge use. As I said, try to leverage from this event, take some leverage, take some interest in what is being done because you will benefit from it on the longer run. So this is another, like catchy phrase that you can keep with you. The real legacy of mega events is institutional capacity, not matches, medals, or moments. I can argue with that myself. So I love to win. I love medals, but that's again, something that you can consider. So this is it for me. I hope I didn't take a lot of your time, didn't bore you a lot. So ready to take any questions you might have. And just, if you want to do that later on, this is my email and my social media stuff. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Cesar. I really appreciate getting that sort of glimpse into the experience of Qatar during the World Cup. So we're going to open it up for Q&A. We're going to start with folks who are in the room, and then we'll alternate between the room and Slido. So if you're online, please go to the Slido hashtag and leave your questions there. But we'll start in the room. While people are sort of getting ready to do that, I'll start with the first question. And also just a quick note for the students in the room and also those online, if you didn't look it up, Cesar mentioned 50 to 60 degrees Celsius. So that's 122 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's pretty extreme. We're expecting some warm weather here this summer, but nothing quite like that. So, okay. So my first question for you, Cesar, to get us kicked off is, what do you see as the single biggest pitfall that we in Seattle should try to avoid in hosting the World Cup, recognizing that it's coming up terribly quickly?
Well, yes, not to enjoy it, basically, not to get into this negative rhetoric that goes around every event. Of course, maybe these days you might be experiencing these kind of things about the costs, about the big issues of having all of these people coming in. Would it be secure enough? Would it be so? You would miss on a really big event. Don't get, of course, pay attention to these things as a university and as think tanks. You might want to also analyze this, but just don't spend too much time on them. It will be a very quick month. Try to enjoy it as much as you can and on all levels. Like enjoy it as a fan, but also enjoy it as a researcher, as a student. There are many things that will happen that you might not have experienced before in another event. Even if Seattle is used, as I said, it's a big city. It's used to host events. Whatever the World Cup brings is a different type of experience that I think you should not really ignore. And that's on the personal side, but on the institutional side, definitely don't get engaged late. That's if I can say that, try to squeeze in in any possible way to have a role in this event.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, a question from the room. Who'd like to start us off? Please don't be shy. Yeah.
I'm sure we've all seen like those clips and videos of the stadiums in Qatar after the World Cup being like kind of abandoned, kind of dusty and very empty. And they're not really being used so much after that one sort of mega event happening in the country. what sort of like economic and infrastructural impacts does that have on Qatar? And, will we see, if not to the same extent, to a lesser extent, something similar in Seattle?
Great. So I'll try to repeat that for the online audience. So the question was, we've seen clips of the stadia in Qatar with that are sort of relatively unused now, like sort of not very actively used. What are the long-term ramifications of that economically, environmentally? Is that a fair rehash? Okay, great.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a very, very important question because it was also part of the buildup. In fact, three, I think, of the stadiums were designed to be unmounted after the one of which is like a beautifully architectural wise. It's an excellent. It's made up of these containers. The containers that you see on ships. This is the 974 stadium. It's made up of containers, and it started to be unmounted, in fact, after the World Cup, because the idea of Qatar is the legacy to be also transferred to other countries. Low-income countries would have benefited from these, stadiums that will be unmounted. So basically, we started with the design. FIFA wanted 12 stadiums. Qatar argued that this is like too much. We ended up with 8 stadiums. That's like worldwide, and they didn't do it like in the old-fashioned kind of stadiums. Beautiful. You can see the architecture. You can see you saw the picture. These are really beautiful pieces of architecture. So basically, they narrowed it down to 8, and from the 8, they knew that they just need to keep like 5. One, the Lusail, the final game stadium, is really a very big, 80,000 spectators. So it is still being used for big events, but of course not. It is underused, like any. Any big stadium. We came to know, for instance, from our collaboration with Real Madrid, which is one of the best teams in Europe. Like, they're constantly in the European Cup, so they use their stadiums very often for us. For them, it is underused. So imagine that Real Madrid, the Santiago Bernabeu stadium, is underused. You could imagine how it would be in Qatar. So of course it is underused, but it is still being used. On the environmental level, these are made up in like desert areas. So basically, of course, the impact on the environment was not as big. It still is there, but it's not as big. And they were, as I said, they were designed in a way to be unmounted at some point, 3 of them at least. So yes, it's a very good question, because there is this concern of them being underused. It's one of the things, in fact, that people were worried about. Why do we need those stadiums? Like, they cost a lot of money and they will not be used. But Qatar is doing its best to keep them there and keep them used. We're hosting the 2027 World Cup in basketball. Of course, these will be converted to indoor, basketball fields and stuff like that. But the country is doing its best, hosting concerts, to still be using these stadiums. But again, yeah, it is a challenge that we have. It's a reality we have to face. The 974, if you look it up, stadium is still there because it was judged to be it was a big success. In fact, the fans loved it because, as I said, these are metal containers. So when fans used to be cheering, they would be stepping on the containers, and it gave like a very nice feeling for the whole audience. Scary in the beginning, but then we get used to it, and we trusted the engineering. So it's a very nice feeling. It was kept after all because it was a success, but the idea is to unmount them and send them to low-income countries.
Great, thanks. This next question comes from Slido. How do you address the real capacity for harm and exploitation such huge projects can have? Namely, both the US and Qatar do not treat manual laborers very well.
Well, I expected that to happen. There is definitely a reality, but there is a big rhetoric, or like a big thing that happens before these events. Of course, the event was very useful into advancing, labor rights, and to also in our research and the Qatar University instead in fact had started that ahead of time. So let me just give you a context. In the whole region, there is a bit of a gap with standards that you might have in the West. But doesn't mean that they are mistreated. Like, we don't all have the same rights. us, even, blue collar, white collar, whatever, that you might have in the US or in Europe, but that doesn't mean that we have no rights. So let's start from this point. Qatar, in fact, in the region, Qatar has been working, especially with the university, on improving the status of these workers. Of course, with the World Cup on the spotlight, this had to be catalyzed. We had to move faster. We had to do better. And if you ask, any common from blue collar to white collar, they would tell you there was a paradigm shift from before and after. And in the region, we lead now in terms of human rights. One of the things that, workers' welfare. One of the things, for instance, is the working hours. As I said, these are extreme weathers. There are very strict working hours, constraints on companies. There are months of the year where they cannot work outside. Most of the year they're working on different shifts, no daytime work, like afternoon, nighttime work. Qatar University has been involved into having an indicator, also an index being designed for the welfare. We have systems all across about air pollution, about the status of the heat on human body. We have designed, air-conditioned or cooling vests and caps for the workers. That doesn't allow them to work in the sun, but it definitely helps them even off, when there is no sun, there is still the heat, and you can monitor, the situation of this person there. So definitely there is a challenge. It is still there. The government acknowledges that it's working with the ILO very closely. They're very transparent. You can see online all of the. If you go off the media, and I'll not use fake news. They're not fake. And I know this might not be the right time to use it, but they're not fake news. But they are disproportionate. Like they're blown out of proportion, definitely. And most countries would see from the outside that this is an evil way of treating people. It's not. It's a very decent way. It might not be optimal yet, but even the government acknowledges these things, and this is one of the legacies, in fact, of the World Cup. Also, thank you for the question. It's that we're still ongoing. We just had 2-3 months ago an event with the ILO, the International Labour Organization, about these kind of things, and the migrants also organization. So with the UN, we work very closely to have the standards really at UN level. I hope this answers the question. But yes, it was addressed and it was an issue.
Thank you. And just a reminder for both our online audience and in the room that we'll be having a workers' rights panel with Council Member Teresa Mosqueda, King County Council Member, as well as representatives of the labor movement on May 4th as part of this series. Another question from the room. Yes, please.
Kind of following up on your comments from the last question, you spoke a fair amount about sort of the legacy of the World Cup. I was wondering, I know this is a hard question, but what is your categorization of what the legacy has been? And then specifically, how have you found that universities really played a role in that?
Great. I'll do my best to repeat it accurately. So she was saying, thank you for to sort of follow up on the last question and thinking a little bit about the legacy of what hosting the World Cup means. How would you sort of summarize or pull together what that legacy is, especially for universities? And yeah, so in this scenario, what was the role that universities played in creating that legacy?
Yeah. Yes. Again, thank you for the question. Well, there is the literature. Of course, the university is still, working a lot on the post-event impact, and a lot of research comes out of this, and the shifts, of course, in crowd management and in very specific areas: technology, crowd management, societal impact. In fact, the same CESRI poll that I was telling you about, when the poll that we started with, also bridges on the previous question. Also asked, these blue collar workers about their experience, before the World Cup, after the World Cup. And so the legacy stays on because we need to maintain this literature. So that's one part. The second part is, of course, the personal experience. Myself, as I told you, I watched like 14 matches. The students had to mingle, the chance to mingle with top players like Lionel Messi. Like, these players were there for a month. Students were the only allowed personnel in these premises because they lived there. So basically, they had a little bit of access more than we did. So there is this personal thing, and of course, the university involvement with running all of these infrastructure that is left. And the exportable nature of these kind of things. As I said, the technology is being used in the US. Of course, experts from the university, faculty, researchers will be consulting with the US on these kind of things because this is how it goes. The technology has to be run by the experts. So they would be either now training your people to be able to run this system, or they will be there on there. So there are, like, again, it's a twofold kind of thing. There's the human personal nature of the involvement of every university member, being a fan or being a researcher, being a student or a faculty. And of course, there is the legacy that keeps on going into the impacts, good or bad, that the World Cup had on the country and on the region in general. Because one of the things also that a university is engaged in is research on how it impacted also positively because, as I said, it's a very small country, a lot of influx. Prices of hotels were, spiking, as you can imagine. So some people, went to the UAE, to neighboring countries, to Saudi Arabia, and flew in, flew out. And Qatar allowed this. We had daily shuttles, so you could be in the UAE, and so it's like San Diego, Seattle. Mostly a 2 hours flight, 2 hours and a half flight. You'd be coming in the morning, watching the game, going back to the at night. So all of these, I hope I answered the questions, but these are the things that come to my mind in terms of the legacy.
Great, thank you. There's a question from Slido that speaks a little bit to also this question of sort of the size of Qatar compared to what we'll experience here in 2026. So the question is, spreading the tournament over 3 large countries would seem to make some of the Qatar-style opportunities for engagement impossible. Was that a mistake?
Well, yeah, exactly. It's like, I don't know how FIFA does it, but it's never like we went from a normal country, not a normal, like European standard big country, to a very small country, and now back to 3 countries. So I don't know how the logic works, but I can anticipate definitely. You could not have the same experience we had. We were lucky, as I told you, I could drive. I was able to watch 3 matches at some point, 3 matches in one day. And you can imagine, first of all, I have to say the organization was great. You were able to come in, come out with your car. I'm not Infantino. I didn't have a chopper that took me from one place to the other. I had my own car. I was driving there and coming back. So I was able to watch at some point 3 games in one day. Of course, the ticket prices were definitely, as you must have seen, everywhere. And that's, again, you have to draw the line. I'm sorry if I'm digressing here, but it's important to mention that, of course, bad press is very common. So this is, as I knew it, this is not the US, this is not the government, this is FIFA. So just for you to keep things in perspective. So yes, I don't know how it will be you might be able to be lucky to watch 1 game, 2 games. So being spread into 3 countries, I honestly don't know what the idea. I don't know if it's a mistake. I cannot claim that I know more than FIFA, because you might have said, well, it was a mistake to organize it in Qatar. But I definitely think that whoever came to Qatar as a football fan, really, this was the best World Cup. This is like heaven for you to be able to watch 14 matches in a World Cup. That's like more than you watch in your regular league, and the best players, very well organized, excellent stadiums. I can say that in the Qatar perspective, it turned out to be a blessing. Hopefully, it will be the same for this World Cup. But, considering the fact that we're talking about a continent, these 3 countries basically form a continent, or like the upper half of a continent. That's the real challenge. UEFA had organized the Euro in multiple countries. It worked well because in Europe, it's very dense. They're closer to each other there. But talking about the US, Canada, and Mexico, that's like that's more than half of America. So this is basically a huge challenge. I don't know honestly how it will work out, but hopefully it will.
Great, thanks. I think we have time for one more question from in the room. Yes, please.
I don't know, is that they're going to be differently loaded in the Qatar World Cup? That's infrastructure or.
Great question. So looking ahead to the 2034 World Cup, 2034 World Cup in Saudi Arabia, relatively close to Qatar. What will they be learning from Qatar's experience in terms of infrastructure, in terms of other things you've spoken about tonight?
Yeah, thank you for the question. In fact, they're very forward-looking. Also, the same kind of researchers that worked on the World Cup have already been contacted by the Saudis to work on similar. They will have this similar issues, but I don't know if you know the geography. Like Saudi Arabia is a huge country also, so they will have a different kind of things. But in terms of weather and in terms of infrastructure, they will have the same thing in cities other than Riyadh and Jeddah that are quite advanced in that perspective. So yes, definitely. First thing is that it means that the Qatar experience was positive for Saudi Arabia to be given the chance to do that. So basically, we are trusted in hosting big events. That's again a legacy for Qatar. We can claim that. The second thing is that they're definitely already in touch with us in terms of transferring the knowledge that we have to their place. And the level of universities, I don't know honestly how it will be. If it's talking about universities, like I can tell you that UW, Ron, basically, you were the first university, in fact, to contact us to benefit from what we went through. That's sad, but those of us who worked enough in academia, as I told you, especially in higher ed, collaboration is usually second to competition. So I don't know if some people might think they know more. I don't know if it's the case for Saudi universities, but I know that at the level of infrastructure, we were already contacted. We're very excited to have it back to our region, but it will not be also as manageable for a football fan as it was in Qatar. So honestly, unless they do it in Luxembourg next time or Liechtenstein, it will be hard to beat.
All right. Thank you so much. I think we're at time. César, I can't thank you enough for sharing your insights with us and also for, again, waking up in the middle of the night to do so. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks to everyone who participated, both online and in the room. A reminder that next Monday, we have Nikki Akavan from the Catholic University of America speaking about Iran and Seattle's World Cup. So I hope you'll join us for that. And again, thank you, César, and we'll sign off for the night.
Thank you for the invitation, and
thanks, everyone.
good luck.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.